Welcome to the first Redlands Area Historical Society meeting of 2020-2021. I'm Steve Spiller, president of the Society. This is our first meeting online via Zoom, and we are grateful for your attendance. Our last meeting was in February, and hopefully it won't be too long before we're once again meeting at the Contemporary Club. In the meantime, we're so very fortunate for the opportunity Zoom provides to continue our mission to share the history of the Redlands area. In addition to our featured speaker, Larry Burns, I would like to acknowledge our other panelists this evening. Ron Running will introduce our speaker, and Erin Benson is doing much of the behind-the-scenes work. Although relatively new to the Historical Society, Erin is totally immersing herself in the activities and programs of the Society, including the intricacies of this new Zoom adventure. Our first order of business this evening is voting on incoming board members. We usually vote in June at the annual Ice Cream Social and Heritage Awards program. The vote did not occur since we had to postpone the Heritage Awards program. We are proposing one new board member at this time, and that is Ron Running. All other board members are continuing to serve terms that will expire in future years. Ron is no stranger to the board, having been active in the Society and previously on the board, including serving as president on 2 different occasions. A city planner with an undergraduate degree in architecture from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and a master's from Georgetown University, Ron is truly at home in his adopted city. Erin is posting a poll, which you can see on your computer screen, and we ask you to complete it now. Thank you. For those of you familiar with Zoom, there is an opportunity during the program to submit questions. There's a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and the questions can be asked anytime during the program. The questions will be answered at the end of the program. Now I would like to turn the meeting over to Ron Running, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. Community College. Larry is also a founding member of the Inlandia Institute, which is a local literary organization. His topic tonight is Secret Inland Empire, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure. He's going to show us and tell us about the first and the many innovations in our area. Larry, take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the Redlands Area Historical Society for inviting me here. I'm really excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be your first Zoom presenter. I hope I live up to your expectations. This was an event we had hoped to do together in person back in March. And so I'm really excited to be able to come back and speak to you. I'll talk briefly about my inspirations for this book, and then I'll talk about some of the places in this book. And along the way, hopefully I'll give you a perspective of the Inland Empire that you find familiar, and perhaps you'll hear a story or two that sounds new and inspiring and may cause you to want to seek out other stories about our exciting and interesting and completely unique part of America. I work as a part-time professor. I have a lot of part-time jobs these days. About 5 years ago, I had a daughter, and this was after I'd already raised 2 sons, but having done it the traditional way where I worked a lot outside of the house, I wanted to be home. So I decided to pick up more teaching, and fortunately this was a time when online teaching was becoming more popular. So in addition to teaching at the local community college here in Riverside, I was able to teach online across the country. And I teach in the humanities, and I teach English coursework. So I teach people how to write essays, I teach people how to tell stories, particularly stories about their place and meaningful places to them. And in addition to that, I teach introductory courses to college freshmen about art appreciation, and art history, as a way to get them to see how there are meaningful connections across all of our disciplines, and really what we're learning generally are skills and abilities that should help our entire greater society. You know, one of the reasons why we choose to go to college and why we support colleges. So I'm happy to support those types of missions. And then this also gave me an opportunity to do more writing. I'd been involved with the Inlandia Institute since its inception. I started off as a fan. I would go to some of their events. And then when they began to formalize and become a publishing house and a place that did marketing and promotion of local literature, I was one of the first people to join in. So 10 years later, when I decided to do some of my own writing, it was great to have that community of support there to teach me how to be a better writer and also teach me the ins and outs of marketing, which is, after I published my first book, I found out just how important that side of the writing discipline is. So I've had a lot of really rich, interesting experiences over the last 5 years along those lines, in addition to being able to stay home and hang out with a pretty amazing 5-year-old daughter. And now, given that we're all working from home, my wife is also working from home. I am speaking to you tonight from an office that used to be mine, but when she moved in here in March, it became hers. And so happy to be back in that space as well. So things I'm working on right now that are related to a sense of place and given a sense of community. I wrote a piece of fiction that's available on my website called Trash Novel, and it was part of a exhibition at Riverside Art Museum in January with a collection of emerging artists. And so we did a little piece of that book. I wrote the book on cardboard on a typewriter, and then we basically stapled it together. And the themes of the book really had to look at a near future Earth, this community that really looked at what was available and decided to create a better society. Basically one that instead of trading money, we decided to trade trash and pollution because we had plenty of it. And if we could create value on anything, why not create value on something that we could get rid of? And so we not only cleaned up the environment, we created equality for all. But unfortunately, there's some other unforeseen circumstances. So I've had an enjoyable time reading those alternative histories and exploring those options, which brings me back to stories that, you know, actually occurred and actually took place and have inspired countless people throughout the Inland Empire. Some of my inspirations for doing this book came from my college experiences where I would be exposed to courses called LA Literature. And what I would be reminded of, wow, there's no Inland Empire literature. There's really no literature about our region, or if it's talked about, it's talked about very, very discreetly or obscurely in bigger places about Los Angeles. So one of my goals was to tell some of the stories that really demonstrate some of our skills and abilities and ways in which we stand out in the world. And as somebody who's been a booster of this region for a long time, I was even surprised at just how much we've actually done and what an effect we've had on the larger world, and not just in terms of food, but in terms of energy production and environmental stewardship and art. And there's just some wonderful art creations here. So those were some of the things I came across. One of the themes I wanted to point out, and I'll come back to again and again, is this concept that's borrowed from India, and this word called jugaad. And it describes a thoughtful solution that uses limited resources and what's around them, using local knowledge and ingenuity to solve problems. And time and again, I ran into this behavior or this trait. So regardless of what sort of groups or organizations, we have a very, very diverse group of people that come to the Inland Empire, this 2-county area. And what draws them together and unifies them is this ability to do more with less. And I think you know, that will has served us well up to this point and will continue to serve us well. And I think we really show the mastery of those types of solutions with a number of the examples I'm going to give here. And these are not just static examples in the past. We see innovative solutions happening all the time. This is the home of Esri, where among many other things they do, they tell us where we are in space and time, and they show us better ways to spend that time. And related to time, as I get into this discussion, in the recent news here, we've talked about a hypothesis put forward in the news that there might be life on Venus. And I immediately thought of a story I came across in researching this book about the Integratron and the creator of that, George Van Tassel, who told us that the designs for this were given to him by aliens on a spaceship that had come from Venus. So if this turns out to be true, I would just like to point out that a Inland Empire resident was one of the first ones to reveal this fact that there was intelligent life on Venus. So fingers crossed that in time we'll see that come across. And as I'll say later in the speaking arrangement here, we've got a location in the Inland Empire where that message, if it does come from space, will come through the Inland Empire first. Next slide, please. Okay, Inland Empire's first Shop Local campaign. I like to think about some of the ways in which residents of the Inland Empire have created innovative strategies to build wealth and prosperity. And as I was researching this book, I was reading another book by Richard Henry Dana Jr. called 2 Years Before the Mast. And it was all about the hides trade and the ships that moved those hides from the Alta California coast to the East Coast tanneries and refineries, where they would turn it into leather and then turn those into goods. And then 2 years later, those goods would make their way back to the Alta California coast, where the people would buy those at a very high markup. And so this was an early attempt to circumnavigate that market and begin to make and sell products ourselves. I think it's a good example of how we manage to do more with less. Our desire to keep things local as much as possible in order to build wealth and security, and seeing ways to do things better. And then this is an early example of local native tribes working with early settlers from southern parts of Mexico as they began to develop ranches and other types of industries. Next slide, please. Now, we are a community that often lacks and doesn't have enough of things, but there was a community of peoples who at one time thought we had way too much of something, and that was alcohol. And so there began to pop up these temperance fountains around the community. And these are one of the coolest, neatest little things that I found in my studies. And I continue to run into them in unexpected ways. The one pictured here is on Euclid Avenue. It's on the median. That's also famous for its annual holiday presentations, where they've got the murals and presentations of all the different holiday traditions there. Something that I've enjoyed since my childhood in Chino. But this particular fountain, one of the things I like about it is that it's hard to tell that it's a fountain. And one of the great things about temperance fountains is there's no real template or design I've found as I continued some research in this area. This one was originally situated about 3 miles north, and they were usually placed in front of saloons. And the reason why they were placed in front of saloons is because the temperance movement wanted to prevent that excuse that men apparently would give, that they meant to just go in for a glass of water at the saloon and then they wound up getting drunk. So this solved that problem, prevented that from occurring. I don't know how successful it actually was, but we can see from our own history just how successful that movement actually was. But the temperance fountains continue to exist to this day. This particular one, I was surprised to learn, actually still works. I mean, it squirts in crazy directions, so beware, but it does squirt water. There's another one that I found in Chino, and that one is a replica. This is an original one. The other one's a replica. That was destroyed in a car accident. I'm not sure if alcohol was involved with that. But a funny, interesting secret fact I found out about the temperance movement is that there's still an active temperance movement in the Inland Empire. As of 2013, there was a membership of over 103 members at this time in the temperance movement. So some of these traditions continue to this day. And these are fun places to find in your own communities as well. I live in Riverside, and across the street from the Museum of Riverside is a statue that I've stared at for years. And I finally looked at the sign in front of it, and it turns out it was a temperance fountain at one time. Next slide, please. This is a bit of kitsch. I could write a whole book about the roadside attractions, things of this nature, but I wanted to touch on a couple of them. This one in particular, because it has an interesting blend of a couple different traditions here. One is the use of local cultures and traditions for commercial purposes. Right? There's a long story tradition in America of doing this to mixed results. Sometimes it's more helpful than others. And this one is interesting because it's called the Wigwam Motel. They're actually shaped like teepees. So there's some cultural use, but also misuse at the same time. But the image remains, and the image is useful and friendly and enjoyable from the road. When I met the family, I got to talk with Samir Patel at the location, and found out that their most popular guests are staycationers, so locals that stay there just to enjoy the kitsch and uniqueness of the place. And then also people who are researching or traveling along Route 66 for recreation often want to stay there as a place to start from, because it's centrally located to a lot of things to see around. And the really cool thing about this space and why I wanted to put it in the book is when I was there, the owners of this place told me about the history, but then also told me about a secret museum in a residential neighborhood a couple miles away. So as I got to know these places, I really got to know the people more. And it became an important aspect of the book, was really learning some other stories from the proprietors of some of these places and some of the creators of these places. Next slide, please. There is a lot of places I could have pointed out in terms of hiking and mountain ranges in the Inland Empire. So I had to pick a few things that were special. This was a special hike, and it's in a special location. It's the highest lookout point in San Bernardino National Forest. It's one of the longest continually operating. One of the fascinating things I discovered when I was there is, given its size and the fact that 2 people live there from Memorial Day through Thanksgiving, is that if anything breaks, it has to be repaired with hand tools. So that goes for everything that you see in that picture, including the structural wooden supports that go another 40 to 50 feet down to the bottom. So it's a really tight, compact place. The tour takes you all of about 45 seconds, but they've got some great history there. And this is a place where I also learned a secret about the national parks, is that you can get something called a squirrel card. So guests who were here before us were kind enough to tell us to look for this squirrel card, to ask for it. And basically what it is when you go to one of these places and you talk to a national park ranger, they can administer the squirrel oath. And when they administer the oath, you are then responsible for telling people about the national parks and the importance of keeping them beautiful and pristine. And of course, not damaging them with any trash or other things like that. When you take this wonderful hike, be sure to take your own food. As you can imagine, there are no services whatsoever. The folks who work here for 2 weeks at a stretch bring a limited supply of goods and are going to be reluctant to share them, to say the least, I would imagine. Again, there's many places you can look around the Inland Empire to catch a view, but on good clear days, the wonderful thing about some of our peaks is that you can see all the way into surrounding counties. You can see down to the Salton Sea on some days from here, as well as all the way out to the Los Angeles area on very clear days. And it also connects to the KAHQUITZ traditions with TAHQUITZ and those histories there that predated all of this development as well. Next slide. Okay, this is Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch. The beautiful thing about Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch is Elmer was a real fixture in this place, and you could walk onto these most days and he would be on the back part of the property. And he would share stories with you, and he was a really fine element of this really unique feature along the National Trails Highway. And unfortunately, Elmer died last year, but in a sign of just how important this place is to community, and just a sign of why some things survive in the Inland Empire when other things don't, is the community came together, and the Friends of Elmer Long created a foundation, and they've reopened this place, and they've saved most of those bottle trees. Shortly after his death, but there began to be some vandalism, and people began to be taking memorabilia from the place. So they managed to preserve most of this space, and it's a really important space. It really speaks to some of the important traditions of the Inland Empire, and one of them is the reuse and to rename and reuse old materials that have been discarded. These bottles came from an old dump of a town that's long gone called Providence, and they just sat for years in Elmer's father's garage, and then one day Elmer decided to begin doing things with them, and this is the result. Something he did not call art. He refused to call it art when I had the chance to speak with him, but he just wanted to have interesting things out there for people to have conversations about. He was somebody who had very strong views about how the world should be and how people should treat one another, and it really came down to an ethos of leave each other alone, let people be themselves. And I think the idea of taking metal rods and attaching glass bottles to them kind of speaks to that idea of letting people do what they want. And the result is an attraction that brings thousands out to a place in the world that otherwise wouldn't see this part of the world. Next slide, please. In addition to neat little side places to go and explore, we also have a lot of connections to Hollywood history and art history. One of the more fascinating and long-reaching ones I found was this cartoonist pilgrimage you can take to meet a authentic Spike statue. The Inland Empire is known for innovative solutions that kind of just seat of your pants. Hey, this sounds like a good idea. Let's make it happen and figure it out later. This was actually authorized by the Charles Schulz Foundation and commissioned for as such, and it's an actual piece. And it was originally in the Needles Chamber of Commerce, but in another move that's total Inland Empire, in order to get greater access, you needed to put it in a place where more people could see it. And so it was placed by Joe Jones in the 24/7 Subway restaurant. So you can see this piece of art any time of the year, 365 days a year. And it's a suitable place to stop in Needles. One of the great things about this story is, you know, even though Charles Schulz only lived here for a year as a young person at age 12, the Seguro cactus that was used in those spike panels are from the nearby Whipple Mountains. So the things of the Inland Empire appear around the world and become images that everybody associates with the desert. So it's those cacti or those cactus in that region that everybody thinks of these days. And that's a special contribution from the Inland Empire. Next slide, please. Another contribution that's uniquely Inland Empire is the use of recycled materials, especially in our deserts. And what we have here is artist Kathy Allen has created this living desert of misfit toys, in a sense. All of these are discarded trash that she's found in debris piles or buried around the desert of Joshua Tree where she lives. And this is 5 acres of creosote bushes where she's basically taken these refugees, these toys that have been thrown away or this garbage that's been left behind by others, and given it a new purpose and a new life. And actually each one of these houses are in this community. It started when I first visited, there was about 18, and then there was 30 by the time I wrote the book. And I want to believe there's close to 60 or 70 individual homes and stories for each one of these homes on these 5 acres. And you can walk them anytime you want. Since this installation's been in, there's now been a labyrinth added. So there's been additional things to do while you're out there. There's even an official parking space now where you can pull up in. And there's not too many visitors here. A couple a week come out, but they come from all over the world. And when Kathy Allen is out there, she sometimes has been known to say hello to folks and show you around other places and give you a tour. But this is another unique thing about this place, and something that's not common everywhere in my travels, is that they have a local newspaper for this place as well. It's about post-it size, which is appropriate. And it's all about making use of small things and making small contributions, and also making small impacts on the environment. You know, one of the messages of this installation is the fact that when we bring innovation, sometimes we bring pollution, sometimes we bring damage, and we need to be addressing that. And one of the ways that artists have addressed that is by putting it to reuse, and not just burying the problem away or merely complaining about it, but turning it into something better. And I think there's a real history and culture in our community of making things better and taking things that aren't useful or aren't valued and making them valuable. And so I really think Kathy Allen captures that here quite wonderfully. There's a lot of places in the desert you could go to see beautiful, unique assemblage art in particular, but this is one I definitely would put on my must-sees. Next slide, please. And this is a local artist hero and somebody who was born and raised in my hometown, Chino, California. So I'm particularly proud to put him in the story. And one of the surprising things I learned, and I learned a lot in this book when I researched this book, I knew so little about this area, come to find out, but I had no idea that Sam Maloof was from the area. He was so impactful and so cool that I thought, oh, there's no way he came from the Inland Empire. But he was a product here, born and raised here, educated here. He was part of a collective of artisans who painted many of the murals in our community out at Scripps College in that surrounding area. And it's no small feat that he is a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient. And he's the first one that received it as a craftsperson. And the man has impacted this industry like no other human being has done, and left his mark in our community as well in a way that I want to share briefly here next. But simply the way he lived his life, and the way he taught other people to work with materials is something that I hope stays with us an awful long time. One of the beautiful things about this place, if you visit it, is not the original location where he did his work. This workshop and home was relocated to make room for the 210 freeway, and it's now in Alta Loma. So where it was originally located, because it's a National Historical Monument, it is one of the few objects that cannot be moved or destroyed through eminent domain. So the building of that freeway was going to have to go around that area, causing about an additional 150 homes to be taken up. So a deal was worked out where Maloof offered to move north and save approximately 150 homes in the process. This move was so precise. Legend has it that the original footing and the workshop to the house, those measurements are within 12 inches of each other in the original footpads, which is pretty remarkable considering all of the pieces that went into building and rebuilding this home piece by piece. And the home is a wonderful example of reuse and simplicity. You know, Maloof is a genius and he's known for his design and innovation, but when you go to his home uses simple red bricks, which you can get just about anywhere. And the reason why is because they had a beauty of their own, but also when they broke, you could just easily replace them. So there was a certain functionality and usefulness to this design, which again, I think speaks to the ethos of the Inland Empire. We don't just want to make something, we want to make something meaningful, something that'll last. And we need it to last because frankly, we don't know when the next supply train's coming along or when we're going to get our fair share of something or something like that. So we're accustomed to making things last and doing more with less. And I think that really influenced Maloof's sensibility when it came to woodworking. And I'm proud to see it reflected in the industry today. Next slide. This particular Plains of Fame Museum in Chino, California has a lot of interesting stories attached to it. One of which is that I learned is that there was a retaliation for the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941, and that took place as a Tokyo raid in April of 1942. The troops who fled that, who were in that mission, were trained at this airport, along with 10,000 other troops trained throughout the war. And what is really unique about this place is they have one-of-a-kind aircraft like the one that you see here, the Northrop Flying Wing. But they also not only have one-of-a-kind aircraft, such as a Mitsubishi Zero that did not successfully kamikaze and was recovered. They fly these airplanes to this day. So this is probably the only place in the world that you can see a Mitsubishi Zero flying overhead. This is also, you know, a number of one-of-a-kind items, including what you see here, the Northrop Flying Wing. I'm fortunate that I got to see it and take a picture because it actually does not exist anymore. In a strange twist of fate, about a year ago, this was out on a flight and there was a malfunction and it crashed in Norco, and the pilot was killed and the plane was destroyed. This is one of the last artifacts and certainly the last one that was still in flying condition. Strangely enough, it landed at the site of another historically important place in the Inland Empire, and that was the Norconian Hotel. It landed on the grounds of the Norconian, which is in and itself is in a strange spot because it's located, many of you probably know this in the Historical Society, but it's located on the U.S. Naval Warfare Station grounds there in Corona, Norco, as well as a California prison. So a very unusual mixed use there, but again, a story in and of itself for another day. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the Malky Museum, which is on the Indian Reservation out there by in Banning. And its claim to fame and why it's special and important to this region and to the United States is because it's the first museum in California about Native Americans, from Native Americans. This museum was an informal museum in Jane Penn's and Dr. Catherine Silva Sable's homes. They would show this private collection to various groups throughout the community. And then they eventually created this museum, which is this really tiny museum. It might be one of the smallest museums in the Inland Empire. If you wrote a book about smallest museums, I would think the Malky would also be in there. But they're having a bigger and bigger impact. And one of the things I love about this place is the ethno-botanical garden, where you really capture a lot of the history of the various Indian tribes, the ones that were native to this area and the ones that were forcibly placed here. A number of the plants grown here are the ones that survived. And so these are the ones that people used to live, and they were for medicines and foods and ways to repair basic things that you needed to live in the desert, like such as shelters. The other great thing that they're doing nowadays, and the reason why they're going to continue to have an impact, is the resurgence of traditions in the area. So now we've got an annual agave harvest that they take care of. And they have the Malky Museum Press, which puts out stories and promotes the contributions of the various Indian tribes in this area to amplify their voice and to get more notice in academic scholarship. So not just presenting history in a static way, but actually shaping and being an important part of the conversation. So this is one of the important developments we'd like to see in the Inland Empire, and speaks to a hopeful future that there'll be more of these types of voices at the table, sharing what's worked in their communities. Next slide, please. Something fun and a little different from the Inland Empire, and really speaks to how perception can shape your feelings about a place. One of the things people often say, this is in the middle of nowhere, and even folks who live here come here sometimes because it's away from the beaten path or it's out of the way. This place was actually put here specifically because it was conveniently located. And it's conveniently located between two large Buddhist communities that serve that worship at this temple, and that is in San Diego and Los Angeles. So when you're thinking about what's the central location between San Diego and Los Angeles, bingo, the Inland Empire, specifically Adelanto. So there are a couple of dozen healing Buddhas here in a large pavilion that's filled with giant sage bushes. And so if you're on this hot desert road off of 395 here in the 15, this is a nice respite from the road. It's cool and refreshing. The sage is beautiful to smell. The images are enjoyable, and the grounds are open to the public just about every day of the year. Once or twice a year, there's a special ceremony where they're closed. But you can even go into the temple. You can get a history of Buddhism. If you're not a person who knows much about the history, you can read the history through the stained glass that encircles the temple itself. It's a very enjoyable walk you can take. And it's a very peaceful, restful place to go. But when you leave, be very careful, because you can lose all that peaceful rest if you're not careful. It's a very busy part of the road, and making a left turn out of that road onto 395 is highly discouraged. That's my pro tip. Do not make a left out of this place. You will lose all of that healing powers that you had previously. Next slide, please. All right, this is CalEarth's location in Hesperia, and what it speaks to for me was the fact that there are different ways to survive in the desert. You could be you could live here part-time and travel around like many tribes did for thousands of years, or you can build permanent structures. And today we really owe a lot to air conditioning for the ability of us to live here year-round. But without those trappings, we might have to look at alternatives. And these types of designs blend some traditional adobe construction with some modern materials to create stronger materials that are easier to use with less specialized skills that when built correctly can even exceed the California strict building standards for earthquake preparedness and things of that nature. So it's designed with traditional methods and means, but can address modern challenges that we face. So I like how it kind of bridges both of those worlds. And this location does workshops and occasional tours of the location as well, so we can learn more about that place and their history. Next slide. This is a place that is very special to me just because of its unique nature. It's the site of the world's first installation of the Deep Space Network. So those of us who enjoy exploring space or looking at those photos from Hubble or those messages from our astronauts, all of those things come through the Deep Space Network, which means every message from space first comes through the Inland Empire before it goes anywhere else. And maybe that's just a technical piece of fact, but I think it's an important technical piece of fact, that we will hear it first. If and when there is life out there, it'll come through here first. It won't be a surprise to those of us who live there. And in a way, how things have changed, what I promote here is the visitor center. The actual complex is several miles north near Fort Irwin. You can't get out there without a very good reason, which is unfortunate because they have one of the world's least convenient national monuments, which is the world's first satellite dish that received messages here. It's since been mothballed, but that is a historical monument. It's very difficult to get into unless you work there. So this is the visitor center where you've got access to a lot of the history. Oh, go ahead, next slide. Thank you. Museum of Pinball, something on the lighter end, but also technologically driven and also driven by local desires. And you know, this is the brainchild of one person whose private collection of pinball machines and classic arcade games has been lovingly taken care of and then open to the public on a quarterly basis. About 4 times a year, there's special events. It's such a well-maintained space and it's such a well-respected place that it now holds world tournaments. So there's qualifying events that happen here that are sanctioned events in the world of pinball. For those of you who are not familiar with that world of pinball, it is highly competitive and it draws people from around the world. So surprisingly enough, a little place like this off the beaten path in Banning, it can actually draw people from all over the world to our doors. And the hope is that places like this will turn into destination resorts where we could have some camping and some hotels and maybe some restaurants and other services out there long term. The longer term vision is to have a bigger presence built on the success and draw of places like this. And it's often confused for the Pinball Hall of Fame, which is in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've been to both, and I can say this one is much more lovingly maintained and much bigger, actually, so it's not surprising. Both of them are worth a visit, but this is one right in our backyard. And as soon as conditions improve, I know that they'll be open and ready to see us again. Again, this is a great example of somebody who does something locally and then begins to open it up for the community so that something that was a personal hobby becomes a community benefit. And it's kind of nice to see that type of thing happen. Next slide, please. This is a great story because it really tells about the impact of the Inland Empire. You know, many of us know that the McDonald's hamburger came from here and many other fast food stories. You know, Taco Bell was taken from the Meat Flat Cafe. But I didn't know that 90% of the world's power is created today on a process that was invented and first used here in the Inland Empire. And this was one of the more fascinating finds I had through research in the book, and also one of the hardest places to find. I literally had directions. I knew it was 1 mile north of the visitor center on Highway 38, and I drove past this place 6, 8, 10 times. I got to see a lot of other places in the area, but it's so unassuming, and as soon as I just gave up looking for something special and just looked out over where a hydroelectric plant would perhaps be located, I discovered that it was sitting right there in the dry creek bed off of Highway 38. So that was one of the more exhilarating discoveries because I'd finally seen it myself. So although it's unassuming and it looks exactly as it did in 1893, when I saw it for the first time, I thought it was one of the most beautiful buildings in the Inland Empire. And its impact is incredible. And I just want to briefly share the story of the electrical engineer that made this, this achievement happen. Electrical engineer Almarnian Decker was brought in to overcome many obstacles involved in the challenge of creating this new power source. First, there was no motors at the time that could handle this feat, so he literally had to invent motors. Using experimental models, rotating magnetic fields that were developed by more famous inventors like Nikola Tesla, Decker created a system that was so out of the box that Westinghouse refused to build them for him. So he had to find another company. There was this upstart company called General Electric, and they agreed to give it a try. And that's just another example of what's possible when there's significant need and few people with the vision to carry it out. And because of this, Redlands had a lot of ice, which kept the citrus fresh and cold for a long train ride across the country. And the rest is history. And the rest is history that's been duplicated around the world. This method is still in use today. It's the most popular method in use today. So there's a significant impact. Next slide, please. Speaking of significant impacts, Dr. June McCarroll is one of the more entertaining characters I came across, and I'm just waiting for the day that a Quentin Tarantino type of director from the Inland Empire sees what an exciting character she is and reimagines her exploring the new history of the American West, like some modern, some Inland Empire Django Unchained for us. And she just had so many skills and represents so many of the wonderful things that are possible with ingenuity and good timing, frankly. Dr. June came to be a simple settler's wife, but put her doctor skills back to use quickly as she realized the tuberculosis in the patients in the area needed support. And we had a severe doctor shortage back then. You'd be surprised to learn we still have a doctor shortage today, but this is something that we've dealt with in our community for probably as long as we've had a community. So she was instrumental in providing healthcare to the area for the tuberculosis patients and also the poor Indians that lived in the area and the poor agriculture and workers who worked in the mines who didn't have access to healthcare. She was their only connection. And so she often ran around the deserts of India with a 6-shooter in hand and her black bag, as the legend goes. And one night, as she was returning home, she was ran off the road right there on Indio Boulevard by a big truck. And so she had a moment of inspiration there on the side of the road. She realized, hey, we need something that indicates what side of the road we should be riding on. And those of us who drive around today would be surprised to learn some roads did not have a white line down the middle when they first built them. That wasn't something that immediately came to mind. So that was her inspiration. She gave this idea to local leaders who said, nah, no thanks, we don't think that's a good idea. She ignored them, painted it, a mile of it herself by hand, as the legend goes. A year later, it got the attention of other people in the state of California. It, along with some other ideas, became a standard here in the state. And then, like many things that start in California, took over the rest of the country and it became a standard around the country. And it's another great example of ingenuity and attention to the needs of other people, resulting in improved safety and better living conditions for not just the Inland Empire, but people around the world. Next slide. Another place trying to make the world a little bit better for our donkeys is Donkeyland. And the really fun thing about it that made me think it has to be in a book about the Inland Empire is the fact that they just began to help these animals ad hoc. So Amber Levon and her family were just doing this out of their car sometimes, helping poor animals that had been hit by cars in Ricci Canyon and the surrounding area. That relationship began to get formalized to the point where Riverside County Animal Services and Moreno Valley Animal Services are statewide experts in the field of assisting these types of animals, and they've got special arrangements legally to work with this nonprofit to help care for these and rehabilitate these animals. And in another good twist of luck here, as an attractor to this area, this nonprofit has garnered a lot of attention over the last couple of years, including some donations from folks like Bob Barker. And because of that, they are creating a state-of-the-art donkey sanctuary here where they can have visitors and you can actually visit the place and see these donkeys in person, which I'm personally excited about. I took a unexpected donkey sanctuary tour in Ireland in 2014, and it was one of the highlights of my trip. So if this becomes a thing, I will be first in line to see the place. Next slide. This is a funny general store that really captures something unique and special in another local collector just holding on to things that were important to him, and then they become these important artifacts later on. This is a wonderful reproduction of what a 1930s general store looked like. And it's an important thing to pay attention to because we have to pay attention to, well, what did we eat and how did we get those things? And we got those things from general stores, and these are the products and these are how they were sold to us. So you get a fascinating glimpse of our history through this. You get a chance to meet Sally McManus if you're there with her. She is a wealth of knowledge, and like many of these places, has stories that could fill additional books for years to come. While you're there, I invite you to try to find the secret door. It's built into one of the walls of product there. And so that's a little fun activity you can do. And it's just $1 to get in, so it's very reasonable. Next slide. This is a UCR's herbarium where one of the world's largest collections of flora and also lichen as well, but representative samples from 49 of the 50 states and all of the states of Mexico here. This is also the place where the scientists who identified and discovered one of the oldest living things in California, and one of the oldest living things in the world, which is a Pleistocene era Harupa colonial oak, which is about 2 or 3 miles north of Highway 60. So really a nearby artifact that has been silently keeping tabs on us for the last, verified up to 13,000 years, but very likely upwards of 30,000 years old based on other related evidence in the space. This really speaks to our environmental heritage and our desire to track and catalog the limited resources that we have in this region. And it's a wonderful public resource here at our local college. Next slide, please. I love this place because it speaks to our accidental place in history. Oftentimes, and we're not ashamed of this fact, at least I'm not, this might not be people's first choice of places to live or go. This might be a place you ended up. There's stories I came across where, oh, the car broke down or the horse died, and this is where we decided to create a town. And this is a little bit of a take on this. This is where the longest, fastest transponder flight took place. So we hold the world record there. The original destination was going to be San Diego from Moscow, but because of fog, we became the next best option. They kept moving inland until they about ran out of fuel, and we had a mostly flat cow pasture, and that's where they landed. And there's very few artifacts left from that period. But one of the things I found in my travels and talking about this book is someone came up to me at an event last year and told me they had a Coca-Cola bottle filled with gasoline that leaked from this plane, because he said it was leaking fuel like crazy. It's a wonder that the entire town didn't just explode. It would have been a much different memorial sign there had that happened. So one of the more unique artifacts I've come across in my travels and studies. Next slide. And I think I'll skip this one, go to the next one. I want to just talk about this road. We've got roads that unite us and roads that divide us, and roads are an important part of the Inland Empire. Transportation is an important part of our identity and shapes who we are. Jackrabbit Trail, if those are familiar, there's literally a 50,000 home development going in right next to it, right up against it. It's already on its way out, but it's probably going to be completely demolished soon. And probably should be, because if you travel there, it's probably more compressed rabbit pellet than it is paved road anymore. It's not exactly a safe alternative, but at its time, it was an innovative design that linked Riverside County for the first time, all of the regions of it, to the county seat. And it took about 35 years to put together, and within 10 years, it was obsolete because of the 60 freeway. So another fitting tale for this and many regions. Next slide. Oh, let's skip this one, go to the next. This is a great story because it's one of the world's first franchised amusement parks. It had its heyday and then it closed, and then it came back bigger and better than ever. So reimagined as a theme park that also focuses on recreation and BMX bikes and environmental stewardship. This place also restored a wetlands area above there. So we've got pollinators back in the area, which really helps the overall health of our ecosystem. So we have people who are rebuilding and recreating our images here, but also doing so with an environmental responsibility and a sensibility that I think really speaks to the future of the Inland Empire. Next slide. And let's see here in the interest of time. Yeah, I like this slide. This is a good reminder too that all around us it was once an ancient lake, the ancient lake TAHQUITZ, that is now the smaller part of the Salton Sea. As it grew and shrank over the hundreds of thousands of years, everything that we've developed here and enjoy has come and gone. And so I always find it a fitting reminder and a detail that I learned, this white travertine that is evident around the area is evidence of those ancient lakes, and portends our past, portends our future, and also speaks to our past, which I find always an interesting thing to discover in your travels. Next slide. And I'd like to end on a message of hope and wonder. We've got many interesting things in the Inland Empire, and we're a city of dreamers, among other things. And sometimes those dreams get ahead of us. We had our share of land schemes in the area, and this is more of a fun poking at the traditions of the old saying of marketing here, where we're 45 minutes from the beach, 45 from the mountains, and 45 from the deserts. Well, we got the beaches right here in Mentone. We've got a tradition of calling some things in limited water access beaches. There's a well-known one off of Santa Ana River and Van Buren Boulevard in Riverside. So this is a long tradition in our area. If you go to this beach, though, definitely wear steel-toe shoes because it's not friendly to your feet. But the town has really taken to it and really speaks to what we can make of ourselves. I think one of the enduring symbols of the Inland Empire is our ability to poke fun at ourselves, see our flaws, but also see a way forward that's positive and supportive and uplifting. And I hope some of these examples have given you a sense of that. And with that said, next slide, I'd be happy to answer any questions that might have popped up. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Larry. If anybody wants to ask questions, please do so at the question and answer tab on your screen. We have a couple. What was something that surprised you in your research and travels for this book?
The surprising thing I found was our commitment to environmental stewardship. So at the herbarium, not only did I find that they had identified this ancient, really old species, but they'd also discovered evidences of how things like the black sage have come to be extinct in our area, and it's due directly to pollution that's come from Los Angeles and curtailed the growth of these areas after we have fires. And so because of these pollutants, we're actually losing species that we otherwise wouldn't lose. So I was really surprised to find the number of places and designs. A lot of places we built were designed with reused materials, like Mott's Museum in Hemet we used all these old materials in the Weber House. And so time and again in Cabot's Pueblo are just great examples of reuse and just how close we are connected to the environment, how important we find it, and what good stewards we've been. That was a surprise to me.
Thank you. Was there a place you wanted to put in the book, but you weren't able to fit?
Yeah, there's a house in Rubidoux that is on the Santa Ana River that sits at the base of Mount Rubidoux. And it's very unassuming. And it's a house made out of World War II airplane surplus. So it's an old airplane that was decommissioned and sold as scrap. And the house is cool. But what I wanted to do is really, it was important to me to tell various stories about the Inland Empire to demonstrate our diversity. And this was a home that was designed by, and really speaks to our military history and other recreation. So the two people who built this home, one was, she was retired military, and her partner and longtime companion, she was a professional golfer out of the desert. And so together they retrofitted and rebuilt this home themselves, and then enjoyed this really unique piece there. I wanted to put that in the book to really capture unique building and our military history in a diverse and different way, but I couldn't really get connections with the current owner, so I couldn't make that work.
Gotcha. We've got one sort of comment and another question or two. One is, I think Redlands may have had an early incidence of the white line than Indio. The Redlands story is that the city engineer undertook it because of the high concentration of automobiles in the town sometime in the early 1910s, and it was later featured in Popular Mechanics in August 1911, written about by Edith Parker Hinckley in On the Banks of the Zaha. So more of a comment, but if you have anything to speak to that.
No, that's an accurate comment. That's something that I learned more about after the publication of the book was the other stories of the white lines, and certainly Dr. Junes isn't the only one that's part of that.
Fantastic.
That rich history. It's another, and it's suitable Inland Empire aspect of it as well. So it's very meaningful.
So we've got a couple more. Such variety, fascinating. Should something be done about the negative stereotypes that prevail about the IE, from Gregory Anderson? I think we should, but in a sense of like where Mentone did, they kind of embraced this. Yeah, this is Mentone Beach. Check it out. There's a certain pride I think we should take in who we are based upon our limited resources, and if we're going to connect to place in a meaningful way, we're connected to this place, and this place is limited and gets polluted and isn't treated right. And I think we can push back on that narrative, but also recognize our flaws. I mean, we have a doctor shortage. We are poor. We need better healthcare, and we can't get better healthcare by pretending that we don't have these problems. So
I think the Inland Empire needs to continue to face these challenges, and they've proven time and again that they can. They can come up with innovative solutions. We can make a flaming hot Cheeto that'll take over the world, a McDonald's hamburger everybody must eat every day, electricity to fuel the planet. We can figure out a way to give everybody in our community healthcare and clean food and water, I bet. And housing too, why not?
I bet.
Possible here.
Something along the lines of the first comment on the student heritage tours. We tell them that George Hinckley created the street white line on the curve of Orange to Cajon in 1911 by Lane. So yes, we agree. Yes, we agree.
Oh, yeah, that is true history.
All right. And so what was the most dangerous place you visited, and did you include it in the book from Michael Grossman?
The most dangerous place. I think the place where I felt the most in danger was the graffiti, the water slide gone graffiti park off of the 15 freeway, Lake Dolores, which has the, I didn't realize this at the time, but it's the first water park in the United States. Conveniently located on your way to Las Vegas, which wound up making a lot of sense when it was around in the 50s and 60s and even in the 90s. But when we were there, I was there with somebody else, thank goodness, but it was about 11 o'clock and it was about 110 degrees already. And so you had this very eerie sense that you were in a desolate place away from civilization. And you're like, is this illegal? Will I get busted? And also, is there strange people here that might hurt me? And also too, oh my gosh, my traveling companion, we're not young men anymore. And so, you know, if we fell down here, there'd be no medical response for days perhaps. So that was probably the scariest I felt there. I never felt in danger for my personal safety from people. I was always in danger from my own dumb behavior or the natural environment teaching me lessons. And I think that's a lesson in itself.
Well, certainly, it's a lesson to age. So we have a couple more. What would you consider the boundaries of the IE?
I am I'm a open arms type of guy naturally, like let you in, when in doubt, put them in. I went with the 2-county MLA designation so I could include as many people as possible. And because we're the Inland Empire, one of the things I thought about is like, well, as an empire, we should be looking beyond our borders and thinking about where we want to go next. And so sensibly, one of the places of similar mindset with great art and unique people and ideas is East Jesus, which is an art establishment near Slab City, if those of you are familiar with Imperial County. So I thought if we were going to expand, that was where we would go. We would go south and east to East Jesus.
Great. We have one last one on the list, unless anybody has anything else. But how long did it take you to research this book?
It took a good year to research the book. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. I had written a similar, smaller book on Riverside, and that took me just about 4 months. And so I thought, oh, it'll take me about twice as long, and it took me about 3 times as long. So the travel took a little bit longer. I wanted to make sure I captured a large cross section of ideas and places, and given the scale of the Inland Empire, that took a lot of time. So I would develop a place and then realize it wasn't really remarkable or special. So I'd have to find another place that really fit what I was looking for more. So there was a lot of trial and error with this book, which was enjoyable. I learned so much about this place that I didn't put in the book, that maybe I could write another book just about stuff that didn't fit.
Well, I bought it during this presentation, so I'm looking forward to it. But can you tell us if the locations are mappable in the book so we can go and explore ourselves?
Yes, I would say 90% of them you're able to access on a regular, consistent basis. There's only a handful that are really you can't do, and many of them you can do remotely.
Oh, well, great for these times.
Yeah, Sunville Village in particular, you can follow their Facebook page. The artist puts up new stories almost daily.
Awesome. Larry, I'm going to thank you and turn it over to Ron. And unless there's anything else, we don't see any more questions. So Ron.
Thank you again, everybody. It's been a pleasure to be here, and it's been really nice to get out of my house, and it's good to be with all of you.
Thank you, Larry, for the fascinating tour of the Inland Empire. Can't wait to see a lot of those sites. I wanted to announce that our next meeting will be Monday, October 26th. Marie Reynolds, a member of our board and our newsletter editor, is going to give us a tour of Redlands Heights. Redlands Heights is one of our oldest portions of the city and had a lot of famous residents in it. So that'll be on the 26th of October, Monday night at 7 p.m. Thank you all for attending.